You know, I was thinking about another type of video where I don't talk about politics and bring the dregs of humanity to my comment section, and it made me think about something. Australian cinema is extremely underrated. Now don't get me wrong, we do have our big hits like Mad Max, Talk to Me, Lake Mungo, Babe, Picnic at Hanging Rock, Crocodile Dundee, but there's a lot of Aussie movies that often fly under the radar and don't get the appreciation they deserve. So now that I actually have viewers and subscribers from other countries, I'm going to recommend 5 Australian movies you need to see. None of these are going to be tonally similar whatsoever, so just a heads up. So let's start off with a controversial one at number 5, Tomorrow When the War Began. I know you'll probably hear that this isn't the best adaptation of the book, but I just want to say it's still really enjoyable as its own thing. It's about a group of teenagers returning from a camping trip only to find that everyone has disappeared because their country is now at war. The characters are extremely realistic for Australian teenagers at the time, and the way they're written is a huge highlight of the film. I would literally die for Homer. The action sequences are some of the best that Aussie cinema had to offer at the time, and the whole movie is full of so much tension that it genuinely has me on the edge of my seat every time I watch it. The plot is pretty straightforward, but I personally love how most of it is spent with these teenagers living in a country at war, because the conversations that come out of these are some of the best scenes in the film. So if you're in the mood for an action-packed movie that'll hit you in your feelings, I highly recommend watching this one. And if you're like me, who was disappointed there was no real follow-up, I highly recommend reading the books, because they're some of the best stories to come out of Australia. Rest in peace, John Marsden, and thank you for this amazing story. Number 4, Predestination. This one's going to be short because I don't really know how to talk about this movie without spoiling it, but I'll give it my best shot. All I'm going to say is the plot revolves around time travel and only has 3 main characters who are all played by critically acclaimed actors, including Ethan fucking Hawke with one of his best performances in my opinion. It seems weird me saying that at first, but think about that statement after you've watched the movie and you'll understand what I mean. I also want to give a heads up that it does deal with some very sensitive subject matter that I personally think is dealt with really well, but others might disagree, which is completely valid. Moving on to number 3 now, and we have the Chant of Jimmie Blacksmith. This is a huge tonal change from the rest of the list, but I don't care. I need more people to see this movie. It's based on the true story of the bushranger Jimmie Governor, and it tells the story of how he was driven to the point of committing his crimes. It's gritty, gory, and just an all-around great western movie with some really strong horror elements to it. In the words of Siskel and Elbert, who summed it up perfectly, every step of the way in this man's life he is exploited by white culture. His expectations are raised and they're not met. He's an Aboriginal misplaced in a white world, so he goes on a rampage. It's a very dark and depressing movie, but it's one that I personally think deserves more attention, because the story of what Jimmie had to go through before he eventually snapped was the story of so many Indigenous people who never got the opportunity for someone to tell theirs. And now we have the 2 actually happy entries on this list. The first one being the Hulu movie Little Monsters. This is like Shaun of the Dead if Shaun was a sociopath. Obviously, with that being said, it's a movie about a deadbeat getting thrown into a zombie apocalypse out of nowhere. But instead of hiding out in his favourite watering hole, the main character Dave is stuck with a group of school kids on an excursion, a child entertainer, and their teacher Miss Caroline, who is the best character in this movie. I'm not even sorry. The action sequences are absolutely insane, and the performance by Alexander England, Lupita Nyong'o, and even Josh Gad are all amazing. They had me pissing myself laughing one minute and being an emotional little bitch the next. But I do have to say that the only downside to this really, really good Australian movie is that you can't watch it in Australia without paying for it. And people wonder why our industry is struggling. But anyway, moving on to our number 1 pick, we have Bran Nue Dae. This was my favourite movie for years as a kid. It's an adaptation of the Australian musical with the same name about an Aboriginal teen, Willie Johnson, running away from a seminary in the town of Perth, and making his way back home to Broome to tell his best friend Rosie how he really feels about her. Obviously with that premise, it is a movie that kids can enjoy. But I want to preface that this isn't specifically a kids movie. And a good example of that is the characters. A homeless man who claims to be his Uncle Tadpole promises to take him back to Broome. And his way of doing so is jumping in front of a combi van driven by 2 hippies named Annie and Slippery, who end up giving them a ride home. If that ain't one of the best setups for a comedy, I don't know what is, man. It's absolutely hilarious with jokes about Aboriginal and Australian culture, and it even has a condom tree. I'm not going to bother explaining that because you need to watch it for yourself to find out. The entire cast were having an absolute blast making this movie, and you can really tell by their performances. Ernie Dingo will always be Uncle Tadpole to me. And with that being the end of our list, it's time for me to wrap up this video. I hope some of you actually watched these movies because they are all so fucking good. As always, remember to like, subscribe, and be a fair dinkum fucking Aussie, and I'll see you all in the next one. Wallawani.
I'm the man with the fire on his face, I'm insidious. Say I'm looking bad in my okay, you're delirious. Shout out to my family, you're the ones who'll be hearing this. Kinda funny how this all started just for band gigs.